Well, with a show called Colby's Nerd Talks, you knew it was only a matter of time before I start talking about the nerdiest of fandoms, Star Trek. And if you're wondering why I'm not wearing a red shirt for this review, do you even Star Trek, bro? Star Trek. So Star Trek is a film that came out in 2009 and was directed by J.J. Abrams, before he was busy doing Star Wars. It was really an attempt to get new fans interested in the adventures of Kirk and Spock and Bones and the rest. And I would say that this film succeeded. In fact, I think this works better than most reboots because it doesn't discount the decades-long history and canon of Star Trek. And I'll talk about how they made that work later. But first, I want to talk about my own personal history with this film because probably to the surprise of nobody, I am a huge Star Trek fan. But I wasn't always as into Star Trek as I am now. I mean, when I was a kid, I was always a fan of Next Generation. That was my go-to Star Trek show. And when it came on TV, I was there. And I even picked up a couple episodes of Voyager and the original series here and there, but I never really got into those as much as I did Next Generation. And as a little kid, I thought the design of Worf in particular was really cool, and that was why I watched it. But it really wasn't until this movie came out and I saw it in theaters when I took a deeper look and found myself appreciating the original series crew just as much as the Next Generation. This Star Trek movie really was my proper introduction into the world of the original series, even if it is a branching timeline. Now let's talk about the cast, because for any Star Trek project, the casting is the most important part. Because really what makes Star Trek so great as a concept and as a show is the interpersonal relationships of the crew members. And for this movie, it's made even harder because you're not building a new crew. You're rebuilding the original crew that has become legendary. Because before this movie came out, if you were to ask any Star Trek fan if they thought it was possible for them to recast William Shatner's Kirk or Leonard Nimoy's Spock, they would say it couldn't be done. But to the credit of this movie, they do a fantastic job with the casting. Now, Chris Pine's Captain Kirk, and he doesn't try to play it exactly like Shatner played it, which if you've seen any of the original series, you know that it can get pretty hammy. Chris Pine just plays it as Chris Pine's interpretation of Captain Kirk, and he does a great job with it. Captain Kirk was always supposed to be this person who had a good moral center and always put the safety of his crew members above anything else, even if it meant bending the rules or sometimes even just flat out breaking the rules of Starfleet procedure, which always put him at odds with Spock, who was constantly following the rules and lived by logic and reason, and Kirk was much more emotional. And Kirk was a womanizer. If he found an alien species he found attractive, he wouldn't hesitate. And Chris Pine definitely plays up that angle too. But what's great is that Chris Pine never overplays Kirk's arrogance or impulsiveness, because you know that he always has a plan. He always knows what's best for the crew, even if it means breaking a few rules. And that brings us to Zachary Quinto's Spock, who is all about the rules. And while I wasn't a huge fan of the original series, I knew who Spock was. And I also knew how iconic Leonard Nimoy's performance of Spock was, and how integral that was to the character. And like Chris Pine, he doesn't try to do an impression of his predecessor, but instead play it as the character should be played. And I would argue that Zachary Quinto brought a lot more depth and conflict within the character of Spock than Leonard Nimoy ever did. And before all the Star Trek fans come at me, pick a random episode of Star Trek the original series and tell me if you could tell that Spock was half human. In this movie, there is no mistaking. Spock is half human, half Vulcan. He's a half-breed of two very different worlds, doesn't fit in anywhere. He's the perfect outsider. And while he's constantly trying to keep his emotions in check and follow the Vulcan code of logic, you know that he can't do that entirely. And through the course of this movie, Kirk is constantly trying to get him to see the human side of things. And more often than you would expect, Spock actually shows human emotions. And I think it goes to prove just how conflicted this character is and why we love him so much. But now we get to my favorite casting choice in this whole movie, Karl Urban as Bones. There is not a more perfect person you could have gotten to play Bones than Karl Urban. It's pretty spooky how close Karl Urban gets to DeForest Kelley's performance in this movie. He got the Bones attitude and mannerisms down to a T, and it was so impressive to watch. I felt like I was transported back in time to the original series. And a close second to my favorite casting is Simon Pegg as Scotty. And just like Bones, he gets the mannerisms and accent and attitude of Scotty down to a T. But for me, what makes Karl Urban's Bones just a little bit better than Simon Pegg's Scotty is that, well, one, he's in the movie a lot longer. And two, somehow Karl Urban was able to give this look, this expression on his face so that he looks identical to bones from the original series. It's really spooky and very impressive they could get his face to move just like DeForest Kelley did. But Simon Pegg still nails it as Scotty, and he's a joy to watch, and he gets some of the funniest lines.
I tested it on Admiral Archer's prize beagle.
Well, I know that dog. What happened to it?
I'll tell you when it reappears. I don't know. I do feel guilty about that.
And the rest of the crew fill their roles fine. Zoe Saldana as Uhura gets a lot more to do in this movie. They really play up her linguistics background so she can always contribute to the mission at hand. And John Cho as Sulu does fine. They give him this awesome expandable samurai sword that he uses to fight a Romulan. That's fun. And he looks and acts like Sulu's supposed to look and act. But then you get to some of the castings that are kind of questionable. There's not many of them, but there are a few that come up, like Anton Yelchin's Chekhov. He does a fine job, and he acts and performs Chekhov perfectly. And he's got the accent, he's got the attitude right, but I mean, look at these two guys. They don't look anything alike. So for me as a visual guy, that's kind of distracting. And it doesn't fit with the original series nearly as well as the other castings do. But for me, that one's borderline. But the castings that really confuse me is Winona Ryder as Spock's mom and Tyler Perry as the head of Starfleet. Why? I mean, Winona Ryder's a fine actress, but as the emotional center of Spock's heart, you cast an actress that's known for playing weird, eccentric, and oftentimes just flat-out crazy characters? That doesn't seem like a Spock's mom to me. And thankfully, she doesn't get a lot of screen time, so it's not that distracting, but whenever she's on screen, I'm just like, why? And that question of why is even more prominent when you start to think about Tyler Perry's role as the Starfleet Admiral. Did they really think that Medea was the best choice for the disciplined and rule-following head of Starfleet? I don't know. And again, he's not in it for much. So again, not a huge issue, but just why? But let's get into what this movie's actually about. It's not just a reboot of the adventures from the original series, but it's also a continuation of the decades of Star Trek lore that's out there. Well, if you follow Star Trek lore way into the future, after Next Generation, there's a supernova that wipes out Romulus. And Ambassador Spock, who's still alive thanks to his Vulcan blood, but looks like a California raisin, has a ship outfitted with red matter, which is this black hole forming device, to put a black hole in the center of the supernova so that it'll just eat itself and Romulus will be fine. Sadly, Spock fails, Romulus is destroyed, but then there's this Romulan extremist named Nero, who's heartbroken that his whole planet was destroyed and blames Spock and vows revenge. But before he can have his revenge, they're both sucked into this black hole, teleported back through time, and when Nero arrives, he kills Kirk's dad. Oh, and George Kirk is played by Chris Hemsworth, before he was Thor, and he does a good job too. But sadly, because of the advanced Romulan technology, the USS Kelvin doesn't stand a chance. He gets obliterated. But not before all other personnel are evacuated, including his wife, who's pregnant with James Tiberius Kirk, the character that Chris Pine will eventually play. So now the timeline's already messed up. In the original series, George Kirk was able to watch his son grow up, and was actually the inspiration that Jim had to join Starfleet and be one of the greatest captains. But now, that's all messed up, so where do we go from here? Well, Kirk does grow up, and he's a delinquent just like he's always been. Doesn't like following the rules, but he is actually smart. His aptitude tests are off the charts, but he just doesn't want to enlist in Starfleet because it got his dad killed. But Christopher Pike, played by Bruce Greenwood, which is another great casting by the way, recruits him while Jim's all bloody and had napkins hanging out of his nose and just looking like a complete mess. And he joins Starfleet. And 3 years later, 1 year faster than his dad, he's taken the Kobayashi Maru test. And now this is the first really big instance of fan service in this movie. Now J.J. Abrams isn't a huge Star Trek fan, he's a huge Star Wars fan. And there's a lot more fan service in those movies than in his Star Trek movies. But he still likes to put some fan service and references and stuff in for the fans because he does still like Star Trek and there are some cool things that need to happen, like the Kobayashi Maru. Now if you don't know, the Kobayashi Maru is a test that every prospective Starfleet captain needs to take. And what it is a simulation that is a no-win scenario. You gotta rescue these people on a stranded ship, but then all of a sudden, Klingons appear, and their shields are up, and they're shooting you, and you only have a few seconds to react. And the test serves as a way to see how a captain would act under these circumstances. What would he sacrifice? And now Kirk, of course, fails it like everybody else, but he goes in for another time, his third time, and he passes. He blows up all the Klingons, rescues the stranded ship, and nobody was injured. How did that happen? He cheated. He implanted a subroutine into the system that changed the conditions of the test, and he did that not just because he's an irreverent jerk that just wanted to cheat. He did it because he doesn't believe in no-win scenarios. He believes that there's always a way to get out of a situation. You just got to be creative enough. And by cheating, by implanting this subroutine, it showed that he was creative enough to get out of this no-win scenario. But he has to go through all the red tape because that's not okay. You can't cheat. He gets whatever the academy equivalent of a court-martial is, so he's grounded, which means he can't go and save Vulcan from Nero's attack. Oh yeah, did I mention that Nero is attacking again? He is. Now he wants to blow Vulcan out of revenge for what happened to Romulus. And I'm going to take this time to talk about Nero for a second. Nero is played by Eric Bana, who you may recognize as Bruce Banner in the incredibly lame Ang Lee Hulk movie. But here he's Nero, and he does a good job as Nero, and Nero actually has a pretty solid motivation. The only problem is it's not explained all that well in the movie. Now you see enough to understand where he's coming from. You understand that Romulus was destroyed. He blames California Raisin Spock, and he wants to blow Vulcan out of revenge. Pretty standard revenge plot. But that's kind of a disposable villain plot. And to be honest, that's kind of the same type of motivation that goes for any of the old MCU villains that you've probably forgot existed. And it really is a shame because a lot of what makes Nero an interesting character got cut from the movie, and I only found out about the complexities of Nero's life because I bought this Star Trek graphic novel that is basically a countdown to the movie, and to show you the events leading up to what happens in the movie, and it helps connect the continuities between the new timeline and the old timeline. I highly recommend reading it because it shows so much more about Nero's character and personality, aside from, the revenge-crazed psychopath that we see in this movie. But I digress. So all the cadets are assigned a starship to help out Vulcan in this crisis. That is, all the cadets except Kirk, who is grounded. But luckily, Bones helps him sneak aboard by giving him probably way too many diseases, the effects of which will probably never go away. And this is the first time we see pretty much the entire crew on board the Enterprise doing their Enterprise thing. The only difference is that Kirk isn't captain, Pike is, but that soon changes when they get to Vulcan and all the other ships are destroyed and they try to negotiate with Nero. Pike goes aboard his ship as one of those Wrath of Khan scorpion slugs down his throat so that he'll be under its mind control and give Nero all the Federation codes that he could ask for. But before he gets captured, he makes Spock captain and Kirk first officer. But unfortunately, even with this beautiful new ship, this A-plus crew, they were still not able to save Vulcan or rescue Pike. So Vulcan's destroyed, Spock's upset but he can't show it, and Kirk is being his usual annoying Kirk self, and he gets himself marooned. Spock just kicks him off the ship. And it's here where Kirk is stranded on the snow planet that I'm just gonna call Hoth, where he runs into old Spock, who is forced to watch his home planet get destroyed right in front of him, and him helpless to do anything about it. And it's so cool to see Leonard Nimoy, the original Spock, put on the ears and makeup again because he is such a good Spock. You can see why Spock is such a household name and beloved by everybody because Leonard Nimoy sells it 100%. And even in his old age, he's still giving it his best. And it's also here where we meet Scotty for the first time, and he's also marooned on this outpost with nothing but his little alien friend and some protein packs. But because Scotty is the miracle worker, or at least he will be, Spock shows him a formula that he hasn't invented yet that will allow Kirk to beam from this planet into the Enterprise going at warp speed. And it works. Kirk and Scotty both beam onto the Enterprise and are able to work their way to the bridge to confront Spock and to show that he is emotionally compromised, which almost gets Kirk killed, but he did prove his point. So now Kirk is captain and Spock has relieved himself to go, cool off or meditate or whatever he does to calm down and get his emotions in check. And now they're off to rescue Pike and get Nero. And this is where you get your big, exciting climax. Nero is coming to Earth to destroy Starfleet and the Federation and everything, the same way he destroyed Vulcan. But the Enterprise intercept him and very sneakily beam Kirk and Spock aboard Nero's ship, where this crazy phaser firefight ensues. And the phasers used in these movies are the best designed phasers ever, because when you change the setting from stun to kill, the end of the barrel flips around from blue meaning stun to red meaning kill. And not only is it a cool visual to see the things switch around like that, it's also a great storytelling device, because the characters don't need to say, I'm switching my phaser from this setting to this setting. All they have to do is hold it up to the camera, switch it around, and you can tell blue means stun, red means kill. It's very intuitive. and it doesn't require any extra dialogue. A lot of critics of Star Trek say there's too much talking anyway. So any device you can have that reduces the amount of exposition is, for me, a welcome addition. And on top of that, they just look so cool. So the firefight breaks out, they rescue Pike, they beam back to the Enterprise, all of the red matter gets ignited inside of Nero's ship, and Nero's getting sucked into this black hole while its ship is being destroyed. And it's here where Kirk fully becomes the captain that we know and love, because while he's watching this ship just get crushed by the gravity of this black hole, he tells her to open all hailing frequencies and tries to contact the ship. And it's so rewarding because for this entire movie, Kirk has been nothing but rude, antagonistic, selfish, vengeful, and here he chooses to show mercy to Nero. He tells him that your ship is being destroyed, no duh, but if Nero were to lower his shields, the Enterprise could beam up Nero and all of his crew, but as heartfelt and character building as that moment was for Kirk, Nero rejects him. So they just let him die. He gets sucked into the black hole. Scotty pulls a crazy maneuver to get out of the gravity of the black hole. The Enterprise escapes, and it ends just like A New Hope ended, with medals and a ceremony, and Kirk becoming the captain that we've always wanted him to be. And that is Star Trek. That is how you reboot a franchise for the next generation. Not the next generation, but like the next generation of fans. Sorry, Star Trek is complicated. So this movie's fantastic. It's a great reboot that acts both as an origin story to see how Kirk and Spock and Bones all got together on the Enterprise, how he became captain, and how the relationship started, but it also doesn't remove the decades of Star Trek history and other series and other movies that have come before it. Everything is still canon. And that's the beauty of this script, that it unites all kinds of Star Trek fans. The old school fans are still happy that their series still happened and is still relevant. The new fans are happy because you've got this new, fun, exciting, action-packed Star Trek movie with a young cast that's entertaining to watch, and it's got enough fan service and references for everybody in between. So thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And comment below, who do you think was the best younger version of their original series counterpart? I mean, I know it's Bones, but comment below anyway. And as always, I'm Colby. This was my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.